skip badat skip bim na parata sheveda hingangaya ine mata kumana shevela hinganga ganda khati mata mana shevela ha ine mata kumana shevela hinganga ganda khati mata shevela hinganga skip it up skip it up that
Joshua Nelson, the Kosher Gospel Singers. So welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vredos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College and Yeshiva University here in New York. Jews have grappled throughout their history with the need to combine Jewish nationalism with universal humanism. Other peoples in history, of course, have faced similar challenges, but the Jewish historical experience has been an especially troublesome one, accentuating this dilemma. The struggle seems more intense than ever with the recent Israeli government's decision to enact a law reaffirming Israel's status as a Jewish state, damaging the sense of equality felt by Israel's Druze, Christian, and Muslim citizens. In 2017, the government withdrew from an agreement that would have created an egalitarian prayer area at the Western Wall, and followed that with a proposition for a strict conversion law that would impinge on the right of non-Orthodox Jews. In addition, this summer, it passed a law that denies equal rights to same-sex couples. Uri Avnery, a prominent voice of Israeli descent and the founder of the hardcore Israeli peace movement, Gush Shalom, the peace bloc, represents the oppositional view, arguing that the nationality law was clearly semi-fascist. Avnery died just this past week at age 94 as he planned to attend a demonstration led by the Druze community against the nation-state law in Tel Aviv on August 15th. That protest, by the way, drew up to 100,000 people and was one of the biggest Israeli protests in years. Years ago, he wrote that he and his friends had asked the Israeli Supreme Court to change the nationality entry on their identity cards from Jewish to Israeli. The court refused, stating that there was no Israeli nation. In his column, he cited Israel's 1.8 million strong Arab minority, which makes up 21% of the population, as well as hundreds of thousands of European non-Jews who had immigrated from the former Soviet Union with their Jewish relatives. So is there an Israeli nation, Avnery wrote? Of course there is. Is there a Jewish nation? Of course there isn't. The democratic and egalitarian dimensions of the Jewish state of Israel seems to be testing itself to its limits. It's been a test and ongoing struggle for much of Jewish history. How should orthodoxy be respected and yet not allowed to become the politics of a radical minority which alienates millions of Jews and non-Jews worldwide? How can modern man regain a personal awareness of God? How can Jews of the new era fuse national pride and religious affiliation with a dedication to human progress, worldly culture, and morality? Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel best exemplified this creative dynamism in the stream of modern Jewish thought through his writings and activism in the civil rights and peace movements of the 1960s, and in the Jewish-Christian dialogue. As Heschel famously put it, "When I march in Selma, my feet are praying." He argues that we need to shock modern Jews and people all over the world out of their complacency, recovering biblical faith as an inward dynamic process, and make it into a universally accessible feeling of the experience of the sublime. Feeling the awe and wonder of being in the presence of the grandeur of nature, for example. A sense of the sublime that entails wonder and radical astonishment. It's about awakening our humanity to a spiritual dimension and capacity for a human self-transcendence that seems to be fast fading from our contemporary secular world consciousness. It's about who will stand in the breach, as the Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Movement would put it. It's about having a radical imagination. The upcoming Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur will be commemorated in that spirit and tradition September 10th and 7th and 19th at the East Side Synagogue, where Reverend Barber will be the keynote speaker and Joshua Nelson, you've just heard, will be singing with the kosher gospel singers. And we're thrilled beyond our most sublime, radical imagination to have a unique brother and sister rabbinic team on the show today who founded the East Side Synagogue congregation and will be leading the services there. They have been called the first in American Jewish history and proudly evoke the first spiritual leadership team of Moses and Miriam, also a brother and sister. Nationally recognized for their groundbreaking work in the field of interfaith relations, particularly with blacks and Jews, been hailed for their dynamic efforts in outreach and reaching unaffiliated Jews. Their innovations in emerging worship and their skill in inspiring preaching and teaching, coupled with their enthusiasm and warmth, have earned them the admiration and high regard of the congregation. And personally, my wife Beatty and I are deeply happy to count them as dear friends and comrades. There's a lot to cover, but before we meet Rabbis Perry and Leah Berkowitz, here's a brief clip of Cornel West and Rabbi Michael Lerner discussing Black-Jewish relations on the Charlie Rose Show. And we'll be back in a few minutes to talk with Perry and Leah.
We begin with the conflict between Jews and blacks in America. The tension in the United States has been growing more and more over the last few years. From events like the Crown Heights riots to the dissension over issues like affirmative action and Zionism and black separatism, the two groups have found themselves at odds. Cornel West is the author of Race Matters. Michael Lerner is the founder and editor of Tikkun magazine. They met over a period of 6 years with a tape recorder between them to try to get to the heart of the divisive and volatile issues that separate blacks and Jews in our country. The results of their conversations appear in this book, Jews and Blacks, Let the Healing Begin. I am pleased to have them here to talk about what they discovered in their dialogue. Welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
Always good
my
to
friend.
be here.
How did this begin? I mean, whose idea was this, Cornel, to say, we need to talk? And out of that dialogue may come some idea or
I'd say
ideas.
very much Michael Lerner's idea. He invited me, based on advice of the late, great Michael Harrington, actually, to come and speak at a conference, 1989, I think it was. And from there, we became good friends and decided that if we were going to focus on social misery in America and try to transform the situation, transform it into a more egalitarian distribution of wealth and power and resources, that we had to highlight two groups that have served as solid pillars for progressive politics in America, namely Jewish Americans and African Americans. And so the dialogue began 6 years ago, and here's the result.
And the tape recording began 6 years ago, or really?
Absolutely.
And I remember one night you and I were having dinner. Is that right?
That's
and
right.
Somewhere on the west side, and you said, I got to go up because we're going to tape part of
We're out
this
running right
ongoing
back
debate
to another
with
dialogue with Brother Lerner. You're absolutely right.
What did you learn about African Americans that you didn't know? What was it that Cornell helped you understand about who he is and where he comes from and what color means?
Well, I'll tell you one incident that happened between us that's reported earlier in the book here. And that is, I was growing up in an inner city in Newark, and there was a lot of tension between blacks and Jews. And I was always very scared in my junior high school, my first year in junior high, to go to school because there were these black kids who were kept on coming up to you and saying, got a nickel, and if you didn't have it, you got slugged. And in the book, I was telling Cornell that, and Cornell said, hey, I was that guy. And then Cornell told that he had been into that for a certain amount of time in his life until he had gotten into the church. And through the church and Jesus, his understanding of Jesus, he had really had a transformative experience and gone in a very different direction. Now, for me, at that point in my life, I was hoping, like when I was that kid, I was hoping that those kids who were attacking me could just be locked up for life. And I never had the vision of the possibility of change. And when I got to know Cornell West, one of the most principled and intelligent and loving people I've ever met, and for him to say to me, I was that guy, really brought home to me at a very deep level the kinds of transformations that are possible, number one, and number two, the limited ways in which people view each other through a particular form of behavior that might be offensive, but to not see the full human being behind that behavior and what may have been going on to lead to it and what might lead to its transformation. So when I heard that from Cornell, that was an incredible moment for me. I've learned a lot of other things in the course of these dialogues, but to really get that human beings are not fixed, and that even when there are moments of anger or things that you don't like, that you shouldn't like, that are morally incorrect, that person, that there's a human being there who embodies the Spirit of God and who can be transformed because the Spirit of God is that transformative energy in the world. I got it through this encounter and made a deep and profound impact.
And I think this personal dimension is very important, even as we talk about various structures of domination and various operations of power in our economy and the nation state. That we're living at a time in which we're seeing the proliferation of vicious put-down, lack of respect, relative paucity of fair-mindedness, and to have a relationship, a companionship, and a friendship that not only cuts across racial lines, but within our communities as well as across our communities, is a way of trying to sustain some sense of hope at a moment in which it seems as if the cynicism and the fatalism and pessimism is overwhelming. And so how do you hold that at arm's length, as it were? Most people, of course, are going to go with the grain because it's fashionable to do so. But I think what we try to do in this text is not simply talk seriously about the levels of unemployment and underemployment, very important, the inadequate health care, the unavailable child care, and so forth, but also to talk about relations that are very important, trying to highlight values of integrity and character.
Let me talk about some of the two important ideas.
Welcome, Leah.
Wonderful to be
and
here.
Perry, to the Radical Imagination. Thank you so much for being here. I can't thank you enough, and just what you're attempting to do here in getting Reverend Barber to be at Rosh Hashanah services is monumental. It's historical. Can't congratulate you enough. I think it's so important, and I want to give you the opportunity to tell our audience more of how this came to be and what you're trying to accomplish. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure. So how did this all get? You were saying this took 8 months.
Yeah, it
to
took a
sort of
long
organize?
time.
A long time.
We,
And tell us about the significance
Sure,
of this, the
sure.
historical
sure.
issue here.
Our services are very innovative.
Yes.
Many of the roots of it go back to our upbringing. We come from a home where our father was a very, very noted rabbinic leader, international Jewish leader as well. And one of the things that he did in his career was had a forum known as the Dialogue Forum, in which internationally renowned personalities came to this, and he and the person, much like we're doing, had a high conversation, not on foolish or trivial topics, but on topics that were of import. And this took place before audiences of thousands of people every week on Monday nights in the fall.
This is what?
This is in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. He had
40 years.
550 internationally renowned personalities.
Wow.
Among those people were many leading civil rights individuals and leaders. Martin Luther King, Andrew Young, Ralph David Abernathy, and so on and so on. And so we grew up in a home where these people came into the home, where we met them, where we related to them. I remember as a young child meeting Dr. King. Dr. King gave me his own private blessing, and we had a very profound little encounter and talk together, which something I always keep with me. But we were always...
What Michael and Cornell are talking about there, that importance of that human contact.
Correct.
You forgot to mention Dr. Heschel, Rabbi Heschel.
And Abraham Joshua Heschel.
You know, my father was a student at the seminary of Rabbi Heschel. I was as well as studying with all of his students. So, and Rabbi Heschel knew me when I was really a small baby. And I went
And he blessed you then too.
And he
I'm
blessed
sure.
me
Tell
too,
us
and I
the
went
story.
to school
And
with
you were
his-
blessed.
Yeah, I went
We're
to
all-
school with his daughter and so on. Now,
Right.
the point I'm trying to make
Yes.
is that this was like part of the mother's milk, dealing with things like this.
Issues
So when we
and people
became
from all viewpoints.
when we became involved in on our own, we said we want to create a synagogue that had great relevance to the human condition, to human issues, and that utilized the particularities of the Jewish tradition and Jewish rituals and Jewish concepts in order to link them to major universal
Themes
topics.
and concerns,
Correct.
exactly.
And so that is why across time we have, as one segment, we've utilized these services to seek to strengthen the Black-Jewish relationship. And in recent years, it has somewhat faded from the level of what it was like in the 1960s and even prior to that. And again, that symbol of Dr. Heschel, Rabbi Heschel, walking with Reverend Dr. King
In Selma.
was in Selma, and working together was emblematic of that Black-Jewish relation.
And in fact, wasn't there a demonstration in 1964 at St. Augustine where 16 rabbis were arrested? That was a record for American history in terms
Correct.
of... So that
Correct.
this alliance was very
So,
strong.
We also
at
always
that
have
time.
had Dr. Forbes.
Right. Dr.
Always-
James
Riverside
Forbes
Church.
has always come to our services, has always brought a message and greeting. And we have many people who are both Jewish African Americans and non-Jewish African Americans who come to the service because the service has this universal quality to it.
Many
Now,
people say I wouldn't miss the full season without coming to Rosh Hashanah,
Right.
who are not Jewish, because they mean so much to me in terms
And-
of
and
orienting
you're
my priorities.
secular,
And I
humanist,
Absolutely.
as
we'll
well
talk
as all
about with you.
stripes
So
and
we,
so on.
I had the privilege of representing the Jewish community in January at an interfaith event marking the birthday of Martin Luther King that was held at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church. Dr. Barber was the keynote speaker. I offered a Bible reading. Dr. Barber and I met there, and he said, look, we have to get together. We have to work together. I said, I agree with you, and I said, I want you to come to Rosh Hashanah. I told him Rosh Hashanah this year is Monday, September 10th. You come to our services, which are held at 79th and Lexington Avenue at the sanctuary there. We lease space in All Souls. And he just, again, is in much demand. But he said, I understand you're not a regular, ordinary rabbi.
Yes.
So that, and therefore, you're someone that I want to connect with. And therefore, I want to come to you. And it was a case of finding the time and making booking, because he really is up and down the length and breadth of the United States.
I've
and even
experienced that myself.
And was even in England earlier.
Liverpool.
This season, and came back. So he said, I heard about you from Dr. Forbes. I heard about how phenomenal these services are.
Right.
Cornel West, who you have here, had come to these services.
Right.
He was very excited about them. At the time, he said, they are universal services, but coming out of the depth of the authentic Jewish tradition. I think that's one of the things that we've worked hard to do, and in terms of your introduction, namely the melding of universalism and particularism, which again was so emblematic of Rabbi Heschel. Rabbi Heschel's feet were praying, but that's because Rabbi Heschel prayed. So therefore it was very, very much part of his whole worldview.
Hasidic
yes,
Orthodox
that's right.
tradition.
To think about how all of you, it says in the Bible, all my bones shall praise you. So therefore, even your feet can be praying. You can pray when you eat. You can pray in all kinds of ways. And I think also, Jim, that we have to, we've had this discussion over time. And this is something that I know Dr. Barber has mentioned. I've heard on many occasions Reverend Al Sharpton talk about that, namely that so many of the civil rights leaders came from out of the spiritual tradition.
The
And
prophetic
yes,
tradition.
right.
Which I
But
think we
in
need
addition,
to, because not to be negative about this, but you said you were unique on this, and there's not too many synagogues that would have Reverend Barber.
in addition, let me just
we'll
add
come
to
to
you.
that.
In
You get into
addition to
that,
the,
okay.
in addition to the prophetic, also to the spiritual tradition.
Right.
What Reverend Sharpton has said is that you need the inspiration, you need the energy, you need the spiritual hope, that it's not an easy task doing this kind of work. It's an uphill battle. There's lots of frustrations, and people will often want to throw up their hands. It's the spiritual tradition that gives you those resources.
The strength.
The strength. Dr. Martin Luther King, before they had their protests, they prayed, and they had time for spiritual reflection. So many of
and
those
I've been
leaders,
to Reverend Barber's demonstrations in Washington recently. Same thing was going on there before
secret way.
Right.
we
Prayed.
hit the
Correct.
streets.
Right. That's the
We
secret
had
weapon to
It
enable
is,
you to
isn't
go
it?
on.
Isn't it?
And that's
To
and
face-
that's how so
Yeah.
many of these leaders, whether it was King or Abernathy or Andrew Young or Jesse Jackson or Howard Thurman or Bayard Rustin or Sharpton, all of them are coming out of that spiritual tradition that is not the spirituality that goes into a cave or goes up on a mountain or is cloistered, but one that's very much active in the here and now.
Although that's okay too, if you've got.
According
Yeah.
to the Jewish tradition,
Okay,
traditionally, when you build a synagogue, you have to have windows there. And that's
Interesting.
because you have to be able to have the outside world look in, and for you to be able to look out into the outside world. The Jewish tradition has its monastic part, but I would say that's not the major part. You cannot just be engaged in navel gazing. You must care about the other. That's why it's spirituality twofold. One is the spirituality that gives you the strength to face the challenges of life. When you feel you're all spent, you don't know how you're going to go on, that's what gives you that. And the other hand is what the tradition teaches. It says in the Torah more than any other commandment, it says 36 times to love the stranger. 18 in Jewish numerology, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet equal a number. If you have Aleph, which is A is 1. So 18 equals Chai, which means life. Double Chai, twice life, is 36. it says 36 times to love the stranger. That means you not only give yourself life when you love the stranger, but you give someone else life. And therefore, most people would not say that that's what it says. So that's what I'm saying. Only when you're steeped in Jewish tradition do you know this is one of the most important commandments. Something repeated so many times more than anything else. What that means is you have to care when someone else is suffering. You have to care when there's poor people. You have to care when people are starving. So therefore, this is what our tradition teaches us. So that's what comes out of the depths of the spiritual tradition.
And
you have to know the spiritual
Exactly.
tradition in order to advocate for it.
But as you were saying before the show too, so many times these high holy holidays become what? Fairly trivial places just to get together and
Right. So was I interrupting
No,
you? Or
no,
can
no,
I
go
say?
ahead.
No, go ahead.
I
Well,
think
we're
the larger issue.
We're all Jews here, so we're used to that, right?
I think the larger issue, is that what the meanings of the holy days are distorted. They are made trivial. They are made trivial. If you ask most people what is Rosh Hashanah, they'll say, oh, it's like time for honey cake, or teglach, which is like honey candy, which was from have a sweet year. If I say to you, have a sweet year, but you have to be worried, how is someone else going to have a sweet year? A lot of people are not going to have a sweet year with all the difficulty in the world. It's not just eating the honey, but it's bringing the honey to the world to sweeten all the negativity that's in the world and try to, in a practical way, change it. So for most people, the Rosh Hashanah is the honey cake, the sweet honey candy, getting together with family, getting new clothing, seeing your friends, but it loses what the depth of the day is about. That's what we've tried to do for 35 years in our services of what the meaning, this is the new year for the whole world, and it's the birth of the human being. So this is a time for, and then we start with Rosh Hashanah and we go into Yom Kippur, which is this whole 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur is a time of moral inventory. Not only people will know the personal moral inventory, but the moral inventory about what's going on in the world. And that's why we're having Dr. Reverend Barber to come to speak about the idea that we have to create a moral accounting, and we need to create a moral focus
moral
of what
revolution,
moral
as he
revolution, a revolution of love in practical terms. The idea of that justice is love with its sleeves rolled up. It's not just that you love people, it's like a nice sentiment, but it's love and justice. And in order to love somebody, you have to see that they are cared for and their needs are met and they're heard.
And where do you get this from the scriptures? From the Jewish scriptures? Give us some examples of how you bring that in.
Well, first of all,
make it a more contemporary.
One of the notions that people think is that the Jewish scriptures are limited to the Bible, to the Hebrew Bible. The Jewish scriptures, the Torah, which is not only the 5 books of Moses, but also the prophets and the writings, known as the Tanakh, is the acronym in Hebrew. And that is, if you pick up any Bible, even Bibles that contain the New Testament, the first part of the Bible is all of those sections: the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and then the writings. But in Jewish terms, our scriptures are not only the Tanakh, but in addition, the entire millennial tradition, what's called the oral Torah, the oral teachings, the interpretations, the Midrash, the Talmud, and all of the subsequent understandings. Its roots are in the Bible, the Tanakh, but it expands far beyond. So, like, to pick up on what Leah was talking about, there's a very famous Hasidic story about how a great spiritual master, whose name was Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, said, I learned the meaning of love by being, of all places, in an inn, in a bar, and seeing 2 non-Jewish peasants having a drink. They were getting a little tipsy, and the first one says to the second, tell me, do you love me? The second says, of course I love you. The first one says, do you really love me? Second one says, of course I really love you. And the first one says, do you know what pains me? Do you know what I lack? And the second one says, no, I don't. To which the first says, well, if you love me, how can you not know what pains me? So said the rabbi, the meaning of love is to know the pain and the lack of an other and to respond to it. And that is like really what in so many ways the Jewish tradition has sought to do, to take the notion of love your neighbor as yourself, love the stranger, and then say, let's not just make this a lovely ideal, but let's put this in practical terms. How do we do this? Where do we do this? When do we do this? And so that's where, you know, we were talking about how we are arguing and talking over each other. This is so much classic Jewish approach that you then take the ideal and you expand it, you try to exegete it, you deepen it, and you go into it to make it a very, very practical type of notion.
Sloan Coffin, Amos?
Yes, Sloan Coffin, who we knew.
Yeah.
Was a colleague of my father.
Yeah, I wanted to bring some of the great Christian leaders
So
too.
Bill Coffin used to say, it's
who's
one
at Riverside
thing,
Church.
Right, it's one thing to say, let justice
minister.
roll down as a mighty stream.
Yeah.
It's another thing to then build a water system. So what the Talmudic and what the
Very
rabbinic
Jewish.
approach has been, take that prophetic ideal, let justice roll down as a mighty stream. But then the rabbi said, well, let's talk about how do we do that? How do we build the water system?
And by the way, which you hear so much of those sentiments within gospel music, right?
Right, of course.
That Joshua
Right,
plays
you know,
so
Dr.
beautifully.
Heschel, we mentioned Dr. Heschel.
Yeah.
Dr. Heschel came from a deep Hasidic background.
Explain a little that to
Sure,
our audience, to understand
sure.
what that means.
Absolutely.
I mean, as New Yorkers
Yeah,
here,
when you were saying about practical, I just want to say that what you were always saying is how it's like the Jewish thing you would say, uvchein, so now that you, which means, so now what? What's the tachlis?
yeah.
What's the takeaway? It's
Yeah,
not just
that's
talk.
what I
It's
say
not
to you.
talking.
Okay, yeah.
It's
Now
not
what-
talking
and
the
where do we
talk,
take
but
all of
walking
this?
the walk.
Yes.
The word for halacha, which you've heard, means not law, but means the path, the way. So this is it. The question is, how do we take these ideas and ideals and make them a way, a path of living? So that's why in Jewish tradition, I just wanted to add what you were saying.
Yeah.
It tells you very concrete ways. You're to give 10% of your income to charity. And the word charity for tzedakah in Hebrew does not mean like charity, like caritas, but let's say in Christianity, which would be more like love. But what tzedakah means is tzedek, is righteousness. It's not something you feel it's a good thing to do, to give of your money. It's the right way.
thing
It's
to do.
righteousness.
Something I'm demanded of
ought,
me.
it's
Demand-
ought.
it's a-
So it's very practical ways about how we're supposed to take care of the poor. That you're supposed to leave the part of the fields left untaken so the poor people could come and
Yeah.
take the poor. Not that they have to come grovel, but it's there for them to take.
Yeah.
So all of these ideas and ideals were concretized in the best sense in the Jewish tradition, because we are, I would say, one of the most practical traditions
Right.
of saying this is not something you just say.
And
but
you have
it's how
this great
have to-
Christian leader coming
Right,
to
so-
actually
so you were gonna
show
speak
how
about- I'm
all
trying
of
to
these
keep the
ideals
thing-
can be played
Right,
out
right.
in
You
an
were
actual
speaking
movement.
about the Hasidic tradition.
Right,
Yeah,
so
go
you were
back.
asking about the Hasidic
Yeah, that
tradition.
was a
So
good point.
in
All
the,
the planes going.
Right.
so
we'll
the 18, in the
put it
18
together,
in the
yeah.
18th century, a great devotional movement of piety and spirituality was founded by Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov and continued by his disciples. They were known as the pious ones. A Hasid is one who really practices chesed, which is love, loving kindness. And they were those who sought to introduce all kinds of new approaches to Judaism. They were already in the tradition, but they sought to highlight them.
With
Intensity of
music and
prayer,
joy, right?
Music, joy,
Feeling.
dance,
Feeling, yeah, dance,
feeling,
right.
intensity, intentionality, and the like.
Love of neighbor, emphasis more on love of neighbor, friendship, caring for the other.
From
So,
the heart.
From the heart, less the intellectual
they were
tradition.
divided
Meaning-
from more of the intellectual
Well, yeah, because
so
orthodox.
they were
Okay.
Orthodox.
They were Orthodox,
All right,
but
help me
this
out
was.
here.
But you had a group that really came out of the
Yeah.
Lithuanian tradition,
Okay.
who were all head,
Right.
but not that much heart,
Right.
and who were like really the intellectuals. And they said, this is what we have to do, all of the intellectual work. But they sought to also bring in the heart work and the devotional life. Now, Professor Heschel comes from, from that tradition. He was a descendant of some of the greatest leaders of that tradition. It was in his bloodstream, and it was in his DNA. And so when he came from Warsaw, where he grew up, and he moved to the United States, he was looking for the kind of synagogues that had that kind of intense joy and intense piety and devotion and seeking to connect to the divine.
Yeah.
He only found that type of thing, he said, in the black church when he was working with King.
That's
So
a
that's
great
why
segue. You know what? Can we also, just because we want to get our discussion.
Sure.
We're talking, of course, about William Barber and him being at the synagogue too. So let's bring in a very short clip of Reverend Barber here
Sure.
and bring him in to this discussion. There's Reverend William Barber, Poor People's Campaign.
I'm so concerned about those that say so much about what God says so little, while saying so little about what God says so much. When we love the Jewish child and the Palestinian child, the Muslim and the Christian and the Hindu and the Buddhist and those who have no faith, but they love this nation. We are reviving the heart of our democracy. When some want to harden and stop the heart of our democracy, we are being called, like our foremothers and fathers, to be the moral defibrillators of our time. Too many are crying. Too many are dying. So this is about whether a government of the people and by the people will in fact serve the people. We must stand flat-footed and declare eternal dissatisfaction with poverty, racism, materialism, and militarism. If you've ever wondered why you were born for this season. If you've ever struggled with why am I here, you are here for this season. If you've ever wrestled with why has God given me the opportunity and the intellect and the ability to go to places that I go, it is for this moment to stand up and raise a moral dissent against the forces of injustice. It's our time. Others have stood, but it's our time now.
It's our time now. And he's going to be here. Again, let's
Monday,
September 10th.
Monday, September 10th, which is Rosh Hashanah. Services begin at 10 a.m.
But
Doors
you
open
get
at
there
9
early,
o'clock.
right? 9 o'clock.
And it goes on till about 2:15, but there's lunch afterwards, complimentary.
Okay. Have a good
All are
breakfast,
welcome.
yeah.
The doors are open
No
to everyone
tickets.
in the community. No tickets needed.
And
No
we have on,
reservation.
this is the information here.
That's right,
That's where we are. The
exactly.
Sanctuary, 1157 Lexington Avenue between 79th and 80th Streets in New York City.
Let me give the
Again,
website.
September 10th. And for further information, there's the phone number.
Let me
There's a
give
phone number, and the website is
is-
www.besthighholyDayServices.com. That's holy day because it's a holy day. BesthighholyDayServices.com. That'll give you all the information that you need to know
Okay.
to come. So again, Monday, September 10th, here in Manhattan. Come and
Right.
hear Dr. Barber. Come and hear Joshua Nelson. Be enthused, be inspired, get ready for the journey.
For the journey.
Come to hear the blowing of the ram's horn, the shofar, to awaken you to what is going on in the world and what you have to do about it.
And you were
to
saying
hear the
something
things.
about, very interesting, about blowing, what is it again? The
Right.
narrow
Right.
part?
In order for
Explain
the
that.
shofar to be effective, you start with the shofar is a large ram's horn,
Right.
and you
Okay.
when you blow it at the narrow end, and it continually goes wider till it gets to a very wide point. In order for it to be effective, you must start at the narrow end. The point is, you start with your particularity.
Okay.
We start with who I am.
Right.
With my energy.
Within.
I'm giving my energy in order to there's no, it's not like it's a trumpet. So it's just you have to give your own energy. There's no reed, I guess that would be the right word for it.
Okay.
So therefore you have to take a breath within in order to then bring the breath out, which is another way of saying you have to be strong in who you are. And that's what these services and Judaism teaches us. We have to be steeped in our own spirituality, in who I am as an individual and as a people and as a religion, but you don't remain there. You start
You
from the
don't
narrow
stop-
point
okay.
and you open wide to the universal. It will not work unless you start from whom you are, who I am authentically. bringing all who I am. I have to bring my very Leah-ness, my very Jewishness, my very rabbiness, my very humanness. I'm different than you and you are different than me. That's the great takeaway from Rosh Hashanah. Today is that is the day of the birth of the world and of the birth of human being. We're all the same, yet we're all different. So I have to take my differentness, my uniqueness, my particularity. I start with the narrow, with who I am, but I don't end there. You keep getting wider and wider and wider. For the sound to go out and to waken the whole world, I have to make it go wide and care about the whole world and wake up the whole world. But I start there, and you open it wide. That's how the sound will come out. I can't start, if I would take a shofar from the wide end, which is so-called the universal, the sound will never come through. It can only come through that I start with who I am. What you were saying before, what all of these people with part of the civil rights movement came out of a faith-based tradition.
And I want to make this even a little more personal, because as I'm hearing you say this, I know, I want you to mention, as I hear you, I feel and hear your mother, who just passed away recently. And I'm just moved. I knew her and I loved her, as everybody did, whoever met her. And I just, as you were speaking, I felt her presence and speaking through you. So I just wanted to mention that. We're going to do another show.
Sure.
Because she's a remarkable woman, and I just wanted to mention that. And
can I just add something? Even you mentioned my mother. She was an intensely Jewish woman and an intensely human woman.
Yeah.
I had a wonderful teacher of theology, Rabbi Professor Eugene Borowitz. He used to say, there's some people who want to make a division between the Jew and the human being. And he said, I prefer to talk about the human being. And that is the melding again of one's Jewishness and one's humanity, to discover the Jew in the human and the human in the Jew. And that's part of what somebody like Professor Heschel, or another one of my teachers, Elie Wiesel, sought to do, to try and meld together the Jewish and the human. And that's what these services, which again are on Monday, September 10th, here in Manhattan at the Sanctuary on 79th and Lexington, are seeking to do. And are seeking to reach people, to bring to them passion. That was the point that Heschel was trying to make about the black church. It brought in passion. He said too many synagogues suffer from a cold. They're cold places. He went to all three denominations. He couldn't find the passion, the exhilaration that you found in the black church. So we say, we want to take that exhilaration and bring it into a Jewish context. We've been called by a lot of people Baptist rabbis, Bapto-Pentecostal rabbis. What they're trying to say is that the kind of, and this is the Hasidic type of enthusiasm and spirit and dynamism, which is found in that tradition and found as well in like the Baptist tradition, we meld them together. I've told Dr. Barber, wait till you see what this is. Other people who've come, whether it was Dr. Forbes, Mrs. Forbes, lots of people have said it's like nothing they've ever seen.
True.
And I say to your viewers, they should come. It's like nothing they've ever seen or experienced, and gives them those vitamins for the whole year. We're living in a culture now, we're living in a country now where there's so much moral crisis going on, where where do we turn to the resources? Where do we have bread for the journey? That's what this is about.
And we say in Jewish tradition, the word for prayer is tefillah. But if you hear it's a pun on it, it's tefillah, to feel it. We have to feel what we're saying. We can't go through what my teacher of mine when I was a little girl would say, mumbo jumbo, of mouthing words. We have to live the words. And that's why also at our services, we have all kinds of modalities. You have dancing in the middle of the services. People say to me, I can't believe that all of a sudden, me alone, I start to dance. And I'll go dancing down the aisle.
Right.
And I said, no, but this is how, at that moment, I feel. That's how I'm praying. So I pray, it's the Heschel idea of praying with my feet. We have the whole congregation get up and dance.
But now,
I dance. And I wanted to say that this starts with Rosh Hashanah, and there's the 10 days where we work on ourselves with the moral introspection, where we have to be concerned with what's going on inside of us and what's going on outside of the world. And then it culminates on Yom Kippur, which we also invite people to come to.
September 19th.
Which is on Wednesday, September 19th. And that's at 10 a.m. in the morning, and the morning service goes till around 3 o'clock. At around 3 o'clock, we have a social justice speaker. This is the point I wanted to say. We're probably going to either have it on gun violence or on poverty, on the idea of taking care of the poor. We're not sure whether we'll do
Okay,
both.
well, let me ask you this.
I wanted to
All
say,
right, go for it.
because people say
'Cause
to
we're
me,
running
I
out of
want to
time
know
here.
when the service is. And
Right,
I
the
go
service.
crazy.
Okay.
And I go ballistic. And I say, no, 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 the service is all day.
It's continuous.
No, because when we have the speaker of social justice, that's praying as well.
Praying as-
That's
Well, that's what I wanted-
We have it, when I speak
I wanted
to
to
the
get.
psychologist
I know.
in
I
the
understand.
afternoon,
What are the plans of actually getting people mobilized in that journey
Right.
further from after the dancing and the internalization and so on, getting that internal energy
Right.
to get out there in the streets and
Right.
support the Poor People's Campaign
Right.
in an activist way, because as we all know, there's a lot to do. We see the world being destroyed in front of us, fascism, creeping fascism. So it's about also getting people
Right.
out there and having policies and programs and fighting for justice, not just in demonstrations, but organizing people. And how do we reach more Jews and others to do this?
So first of all, in answer to the last part of your question, that's why we're on this program.
Okay.
We are seeking to reach other people, and we deputize every viewer to be an ambassador, to go out, tell about these services, to bring people in.
Okay.
This is also a battle against indifference. This is one of the great problems in the Jewish community. It's
Why? Why has that become such a problem?
well-
Have we become too successful?
Well,
worldly wise, in a
yeah,
sense?
again, because of that delicate balance between the universal and the particular, that we have to embrace both. If we hold on only to one end and not the other, something will be wrong. Now, you know, part of the trade-off with enlightenment and all the values of enlightenment that we've embraced is some of the spiritual values of our tradition have fallen by the wayside. This is a battle against indifference. It's a battle against people who just don't care. In answer to your question, how to do this, you know, someone once said, use the image of the body. There are people who are the mouth of the body, the ears of the body, the feet of the body, the arms of the body. So we view our task as religious leaders, particularly to create the type of environment and to create inspiration, enthusiasm, education. That is, without that, you're not going to get people out on the street.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most vital things. If there was a successful civil rights movement, it was because of Martin Luther King inspired people and brought the fire within them out, reminded them they had a soul that they have to link to justice.
So
and that's what we seek to do.
We have 30 seconds to say, to just finish up. We are all,
Promoting.
we're deputizing everybody in our audience there to come to your service, to be inspired, and to get out there.
Make New Year's resolutions.
Make New Year's resolutions.
To practically take these ideas and bring it in the world, in their life and in the world.
September 10th at the Sanctuary, 79th and Lexington, www.besthighoholydayservices.com, 212-560-2222.
We'll be there.
Thank you.
Beanie and I will be there. Thank you so very, very much.
Sweet and happy New Year to
Sweet
all.
And Happy New Year to you all. Thank you so very, very much. As Jim Bretto's here again on the Radical Imagination. We'll see you next week, and we're going to go out with Aretha Franklin, Spirit in the Dark.
Getting the spirit in the dark. Getting the spirit, getting it in the dark. People move. Oh, tell me, ain't we grooving? Getting the spirit, getting it in the dark. Tell me, sister, how do you feel? Tell me, my brother, how do you feel? If you feel like that, get up and let's start. the spirit, getting it in the dark.